Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Pakistan has produced two famous AQ Khans or Abdul Qadir Khans. One spelled with an I, Qadir, one with a double E, Qadir. Both were greatly successful and globally acknowledged spinners of one kind or the other. So, one that is spelled with I, Abdul Qadir Khan, he was a famous leg spin bowler, leg spin googly bowler, tremendous reputation, I think the most famous before Shane Warne. He unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago at a relatively young age of 63. Now, the second Abdul Qadir Khan with a double E, he's passed away in Pakistan at the age of 85. Now, why do we explain to you that we call Abdul Qadir Khan the leg spinner, a spinner for good reason, right? He was a spin bowler, right? A wrist spin bowler, in fact. Why do we call Abdul Qadir Khan or Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan or the scientist Abdul Qadir Khan a spinner? Because he also did his own kind of spinning, which means he was an expert in the science of building centrifuges, and centrifuges especially those that are used to enrich uranium. So, as many of you might know, that centrifuges then spin at a very high rate, and that sort of concentrates, I am oversimplifying it, that sort of concentrates the uranium. So, uranium becomes more enriched, so 20% to 30%, and then it goes up to weapons grade. So, he is also the father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb. He is father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb. Now, in Pakistan, he is only the second most admired person after, I'd say, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. In fact, a lot of people say this and I agree with it. Because if you go in Pakistan, just the folklore about him is incredible. In the days I used to cover Pakistan as a reporter, we used to play this game, reporters and taxi drivers, you know, all of us have some taxi driver story. So, we'd play this game with taxi drivers. Bhai, in Punjabi, tanu pata kahuta kithe hai? Keda kahuta? Most of them will say, Keda kahuta? What kahuta? Then you would say, oh, jithe ji, Abdul Qadir Khan kuch kaam kar raha hai. Oh, acha ji, bolo bomb factory, right? Bomb factory. So, the folklore was that he runs Pakistan's most important bomb factory or bomb factory. So, he is the father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb, and much more after that, nuclear missiles, nuclear tipped missile as well, and more importantly, what made him even more infamous besides getting this nuclear technology clandestinely for Pakistan was also that he became among the most successful and prolific nuclear traders, proliferators and smugglers. He was running a racket in his own right, a racket which had sovereign sanction in Pakistan, and he did a lot of that stuff by himself. He led that operation for a long time until the Western world finally caught up with him by around 2004-2005, but until then he had done the damage. Now, in a 2006 article, shortly after he was finally called out, and the Americans and the Western world got completely fed up of him because they now saw stuff going to Iran, North Korea. It had already happened, now more of it was happening, and then they were worried about Libya, Saudi Arabia, Syria, all kinds of places. So, they called him out, and he was now put in shade, also put under house arrest of some sort, which was a very convenient house arrest. He also launched a political party at some point, but that didn't go so far, much further. Nobody would dare to harm in Pakistan or to bring him to account before the law, but at the same time, his career more or less ended about 2005, 6, 7. Although I am sure clandestinely or quietly his advice was always sought and was given. He is now passed away. After he was taken out of the system under American pressure, New York Times wrote a timeline on his life, on his professional life. There he was described by the New York Times as a leading figure behind a global nuclear black market till his fall in 2005. And the New York Times then said that he had proliferated stuff to Iran, North Korea, Libya. Now, North Korea was very significant because it is with North Korea that he did a barter, which means I will help you enrich uranium, I will give you nuclear bomb technology, in return you give me missile technology. So, most of the Pakistani missiles now that you see, most of these missiles have North Korean ancestry. So this was a missile for nuke technology barter that he set up, and he ran it. In fact, after he was called out and he was put in under house arrest, his wife Henny Khan, or Hendrina Khan, who was European, she gave an interview to Der Spiegel magazine in Germany saying that he was framed, that he was unfairly blamed for what he was doing. She didn't say that he wasn't doing what he was accused of doing. She said that he was doing stuff with North Korea, but she said that was under government of Pakistan's not just knowledge but also clearance and on their instructions. And she said that his visit to North Korea in 2000 was under specific instructions from General Musharraf. I don't disbelieve that for one moment, because he was not a rogue in Pakistan who was working in spite of the Pakistani establishment. He was the most deep set asset of the Pakistani establishment, always worked for them. He did not break any Pakistani law in that sense. So Pakistanis were okay not to call him to account in their own law courts. Now 2005, as I told you, his working life, active working life ended. He was born in India in 1936 in Bhopal. After partitions, some of his family left to Pakistan. He left later. He left in 1952. And he apparently used to tell people that he had a very bitter experience while leaving. He was treated very badly, etc. I don't know what is true, what is the story. Nobody knows the difference between fact and fiction. But he deeply disliked and hated Indians and Hindus and made no secret of that fact. Now, normally you would think that that kind of deep set sort of hostility to India would be among the Punjabi Muslims in Pakistan, but he was actually a Pathan. He was a Pathan from Orakzai clan. So he carried that strong partition time hostility and anger. He went to Karachi, he studied science, graduated and with some specialization in solid state physics, and as happens in our countries, people who are overqualified are then put in jobs which have nothing to do with their qualification. So his first job was as a weights and measures officer in Karachi Municipal Corporation. But he was a hardworking guy, kept on applying for scholarships overseas, had a good academic record in physics, and then got selected for a scholarship in Europe. So he first went to West Berlin to a university, and then to technical university called Delft University in Holland, Delft's University, D-E-L-F-T. At Delft's University in Holland, he got a degree in metallurgical engineering. That was his specialization. 1972, at University of Leuven, Belgium, he got his PhD, again in the same field, metallurgical engineering. So see, metallurgical engineering on to centrifuge technology. So you know where he is coming from, and you know where he is headed. In May 1972, he joined the Physical Dynamic Research Lab, or FDO as it's called, in Holland. They were the subcontractors for Ultra Centrifuge Netherlands, UCN, which in turn was the Dutch partner in an organization called Urenco, which was the European multinational uranium enrichment organization. So that is where he got a key look into the uranium enrichment technology. May 1, he joined them 1972. May 8, within a week of joining, he visited the company's advanced enrichment facility in Almelo. He had not taken anybody's permission to go there, but his company did not complain about it, but he went there. He wasn't needed to be there. So once again, you can see what he was headed for. And once again, I'll take you back to this time frame. December 1971, Pakistan has just lost the war. The country has split. Bhutto has now become the leader. Pakistan is smarting. A lot of Pakistanis are smarting that they lost a war. They lost more than half their country. And that is when the nuclear thought in Pakistan also begins to emerge. And that is when A.Q. Khan starts visiting these enrichment facilities without authorization. Obviously, you know what he is curious about. Early 1970s, Dutch intelligence got worried about him. In 1974, May 18, India conducted the first nuclear test. Buddha smiled the first time under Mrs. Gandhi. The same year, within months, that is September of 1974, he wrote a letter to Bhutto. A.Q. Khan wrote a letter to Bhutto saying that, look, we know that India has the bomb, etc. Pakistan doesn't have one, but I have the ability to take Pakistan in that direction. Why don't you ask me to help with Pakistan's nuclear program, and I will build the bomb for Pakistan. Late 1974, UCN, the company that his company, in fact, FTO subcontracted for, they assigned him to translate the manuals of the most advanced German designed G1 and G2 centrifuge technology into Dutch. For 16 days, he had these manuals all by himself. He could do what he wanted with those manuals, and you will soon know what he did. 70s and 80s, US intelligence had already got very suspicious of him. The Dutch wanted to arrest him, but again it's one of those stories which has never unraveled fully. US intelligence actually told the Dutch not to arrest him. They said, don't arrest him, let us see what he is up to, let's find out a bit more on his modus operandi, what he is doing, who he is working for. Now we don't know the motives. Maybe in 1979 the Soviets came to Afghanistan, and now the Americans would have preferred to be more forgiving to Pakistan. Maybe it was something else, maybe it was one of those usual screw-ups that take place in intelligence agencies. But he was allowed to function freely. 1975 he was transferred by his lab on suspicion. On suspicion because he had gone to a nuclear technology trade show in Switzerland, and he was asking questions that people thought were inappropriate for him to be asking given his specialization and his field of interest. December 75, because he now knew that the clock was running out on him, he knew that his cover was blown. In December 75, he escaped from Holland with blueprints for centrifuges and other components, and also contact information on 100 plus companies around the world, across the world, which were working with these legitimate nuclear technology enrichment companies. So he now had everything, and now he landed up in Pakistan. Immediately, early 1976, he was given a lab to start the centrifuge work in Kahuta. In July 1976, this lab came under his autonomous control. It was called Engineering Research Lab, as innocuous as that, but not for long. This was on July 31, 1976. So by this time, at the age of 40, he was also already Pakistan's nuclear star, right? Born in 1936. 1978, he designed Pakistan's first P1 centrifuge. P1, P I presume for Pakistan, although it may be something else. This was based on the German G1 centrifuge, the manuals of which he had filched and he had brought along with him. April 4, 1978, he set up Pakistan's first enrichment unit and carried out the first enrichment successfully in Pakistan as quickly as that. Early 1980s, Pakistan and China were very close together now. Early 1980s, because China uses Pakistan to balance India, Chinese transferred the designs of their first nuclear bomb. Their first nuclear bomb that they tested in 1976. Those designs were transferred to him. He had the ability to enrich uranium. So sure enough, by 1986, he had the bomb ready. And then you have some evidence of what happened after that. 86, 87, exercise Brass Tacks took place. It looked like India had a very aggressive plan to break Pakistan into two. And that is when Mushahid Hussain, then a very famous Pakistani journalist, now a politician, he set up an interview with Kuldeep Nayyar, late Kuldeep Nayyar, with A.Q. Khan, where A.Q. Khan told him that we have the bomb. So that was the first nuclear warning or the nuclear blackmail that came from Pakistan's side towards India, and that led to a cooling off, and after that we know tension was cooled down. Zia-ul Haq came to India to watch the cricket test match at Jaipur. He met Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and Zail Singh. It was called cricket diplomacy, but maybe it was the first example of nuclear blackmail by the Pakistanis, and they got away with it. 1981, earlier on, as Zia had taken over after jailing Bhutto, in 1981 his lab, which was Engineering Research Lab, I told you it changed its name, it wasn't so innocuous anymore. He renamed it A.Q. Khan Research Laboratory. So he was already a legend in Pakistan at the age of 45 with a lab named after him, and he was the boss. He had access to all kinds of funds, no questions asked, no audit, etc., etc. 1983, he was convicted in absentia in Holland or the Netherlands for nuclear smuggling or nuclear espionage. 1983, mind you, that early. And he was jailed. He was given a 4-year jail sentence. Obviously, he was in Pakistan, nobody could catch him. 85, he won an appeal, basically on a technicality, saying that the summonses had not been served on him properly. And after that, the Dutch decided not to pursue it because they knew the Pakistanis would never let him close to him. So 85, when he was let off, when he won his appeal, the Dutch did not pursue it, apparently because they said they realized it would be impossible to go and chase him in Pakistan because the Pakistanis would not give any access to them to him. But it's also possible because by that time, for the Americans and for the Western world, Pakistan was once again back to being the stalwart ally, in this case against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. So he carried on, and then from late 80s onwards, he started his export business. Iran was among the first. So, and this business of export to Iran went on till 1995. In 1995, he is supposed to have transferred P2 centrifuges to Iran, although Pakistan government claims that he did not transfer anything to Iran after 1989-91, but that much even they don't deny. He actually helped Iran, he had already helped Iran build a cascade of 50,000 P1 centrifuges. So, you know, all the concern that Israel, America, rest of the world has about the Iranian bomb, you know, where the basic samagri or basic material for that came from. Now, there was also a reference in some papers that emerged in Iraq during inspections in 1995 that he had also offered to help Iraq with their nuclear program. But you know, I don't know what, was Saddam Hussein clever or was Saddam Hussein dumb? Nobody would know, but Saddam Hussein turned it down, suspecting that the Pakistanis or A.Q. Khan had never meant to give him nuclear technology, that it was a sting operation to catch him and maybe to turn the Americans onto him. And who knows, in this game of smoke and mirrors with intelligence, what else goes on in the world? None of us has any idea. Now, the second nuclear blackmail came from Pakistan in 1990. That was in the summer of 1990 when it looked like our countries were again going to war, and that is when two revelations came. One from Seymour Hersh, who's the American investigative journalist in, I think, in New Yorker. We'll try and find the article and share the link with you if we can find it. Also a book by William Burroughs and Robert Windrum. Robert Windrum was an NBC investigative journalist, and William Burroughs was also an investigative journalist who then became a professor of journalism. So they wrote this book, which we extracted in India Today. It was the cover story in India Today. You can see that cover. They called the subcontinent the most dangerous place in the world. So both them and Seymour Hersh said that at the peak of that crisis, Pakistan's then foreign minister Sahibzada Yaqub Khan had threatened his counterpart Inder Gujral in VP Singh's rather weak government that if there is a war right now, you will see the fire in your rivers and in the mountains of the kind that you've never imagined before. Mr. Gujral responded to him. This was spoken in court like this. So Mr. Gujral also responded, "Okay, don't do such a thing, because after all, remember that हमने भी उन्हीं दरियाओं का पानी पिया है जिनका आपने पिया है. We've also been brought up on the waters of the same rivers as you." So this was like an exchange between them, which was reported back to the Prime Minister in India and others. Documented by some Indians, but lots of foreign historians. Besides these two, there was also a visit by Bob Gates. Bob Gates was number 2 in the CIA then. So he had gone to Pakistan and then he came to Delhi and he conveyed the same message. That is what Windrum and Burroughs and also Seymour Hersh said. Bob Gates said that, look, they will use a nuclear weapon, they will use it early in war, not later in war. They will use it early in war to try and pulverize you. And it does look like VP Singh's government lost nerve, or possibly India was not ready as yet with the credible weapon system. They were not sure they'll be able to drop something at the right time someplace. In the same general period, 87, there was one more big controversy and big nuclear smuggling operation was cracked in Europe. That's the story I wrote. It was a long, detailed investigative story in 1987. I'm sharing a screenshot of the first page from India Today's website on your screen, but you can read the whole story in the link that I'm giving you from India Today's website. Now, in this case, a European company called Liebold Heraeus, a German company, they were involved in a clandestine construction and transport, not merely of centrifuges, but of an entire enrichment plant. It was as audacious as that, and that kind of money was involved, because from his own enrichment plant, he was only able to produce about 10 kilos of enriched uranium a year, which makes one small size bomb. Now if he had this factory, he could make much more. This operation was cracked, lots of people were arrested. Swiss, West German and French intelligence agencies worked together. The idea was to import or smuggle 3 huge autoclaves, right? Autoclaves, as you know, are like ovens. 3 huge autoclaves or electronically controlled precision furnaces. These were to have type 48X steel containers. Now I am talking some jargon with you. And type CBAD1 desublimers. Now I will try and break it down as simply as I can. Scientists among you, nuclear physicists, will not be impressed, but very few of us have the grey matter to be nuclear physicists. So for the rest of us, these equipments were already on the International Atomic Energy Agency trigger list, smuggling trigger list. Using this as a plant, you can turn solid uranium hexafluoride into gas. So what happens is you turn solid uranium hexafluoride into gas, and there it pumps it into thousands of centrifuges that Pak had learned to build already. So that gas goes into those centrifuges and then is enriched further. So briefly, let me try and explain. These giant autoclaves of the size of 5 meters by 2 meters, they function like massive ovens, and type 48X containers, they have uranium hexafluoride which they pump under 1.8 bar pressure. This is technical but important. 1.8 bar pressure into these centrifuges, right? Desublimers now create cold traps. These cold traps are needed to pass the gas into the centrifuge cascades under low pressure, negative pressure conditions. When that happens, you can start enrichment. Now, if you want to just enrich up to 20%, that may be for electricity generation, then you just need 50 cm long sublimers, 15 centimeters. But when you want to, but if 15 centimeter sublimers will do for enriching up to 20% to make nuclear power, then why do you need 5 meters by 2 meters? Those are massive in comparison. You need them because you want to enrich much more to a much greater level, and that's how the Pakistanis wanted to start mass producing enriched uranium, which they would have then traded. I don't know whether they did some of that later through some other methods or not, but they've been exporting a lot of this, quote unquote exporting, because smuggling a lot of this stuff. So this story continued. Actually, I also continued to be in pursuit for the story of this story for quite some time. In 1994, I visited Germany and several other countries in Western Europe, again also Washington, to track one more big nuclear smuggling operation. That is after some apartments housing the Pakistanis were raided in Germany. And as it happens, in the pursuit of stories like this, you find allies. One of the allies was a very famous journalist and researcher and specialist on nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, based in Bonn, Mark Hibbs. Mark Hibbs, now I noticed, you can see his Twitter page, he is with Carnegie in Germany. He then used to be the editor of Nucleonics Week and Nuclear Fuel. So I went and met him a few times. He did help me with some information. I also interviewed then a man called Bernd Schmidt-Boyer. He was Germany's national security and intelligence minister, also in charge of military intelligence, and he was a little bit flashy and flamboyant. That's why he was called in German media, etc., 008. That is another level above James Bond 007. I conducted this short interview with him, which was published in India Today, where I did ask him if it wasn't true that his government was investigating a Stuttgart company for having smuggled nuclear technology to Pakistan, and he gave me a half diplomatic answer, but not a no at all, not a no at all. In fact, if you read between the lines, you know what he's saying. So I'm sharing a screenshot and a link of that interview with you, as well as two more things. One, just a fun story that I wrote in May 1993 from Pakistan after Nawaz Sharif had been sacked the second time, on what an intriguing country Pakistan was, and in that story you find that reference to the taxi drivers calling Kahuta bomb factory. Then Feb 15, 1994, the India Today cover story, which ran an extract from Burroughs and Windrum's book. Now I will leave it to you to decide that among these two great spinners that Pakistan produced, who was more famous and who was more infamous, right? Also, generally, wherever the history of nuclear proliferation and smuggling is written, A.Q. Khan will be its leading star. He's almost like he's almost a Dr. Strangelove-like figure. Remember that Hollywood character who was obsessed with the nuclear bomb? He was a little bit like that, no different. And also, he was arguably the most successful nuclear supply in the history of the world, probably next only to Klaus Fuchs and Alan Nunn, who had stolen the Western nuclear secrets to the Kremlin.